Hi, my name is Meredith Landry. I'm a managing editor of custom content at Sightline, and I'd like to welcome you today to our live panel discussion about the current landscape and future of cell and gene therapies. I'm joined today by our panel at the ASGCT conference in Boston 2026. With us today, we have Keith Wanicut. He is the SVP of Regulatory Affairs at Lexeo Therapeutics. We have Lena Winstedt, VP and Head of Scientific Affairs at Hansa Biopharma. We have Eric Digman-Wickland, CEO of Circio. And then we have Karen Malone, CEO of Genescape. And then Alina Lelich, Global Market Development at Thermo Fisher Scientific. Welcome, panel.
Thank you.
So without further ado, we will get into our discussion. The cell and gene therapy sector has matured significantly over the past several years. From your perspective, what defines the industry's current crossroads moment? And what are the biggest forces shaping the field right now? Alina, I'd like you to start with that one.
I think we've done a phenomenal job in terms of leading the field and progressing in the R&D space and getting phenomenal new therapeutics to the patients. What I think is sustainability in terms of where we're headed. We've got there's this massive field in terms of in the CAR-T space, leading the therapeutics in terms of in vivo to decrease that time to the patient. So I feel in terms of where we're going in the crossroads in sustaining the field in terms of the development and getting those therapeutics to the patients quicker.
Nice. Who else would like to take that one? What is the crossroads that we're at?
I think we're now moving to the next generation of both gene and cell therapies, where we had conventional cell therapy was the ex vivo autologous approach. The first generation of AAVs were wild-type AAVs with wild-type genes. And then some of these have disappointed commercially, and now we're seeing the next generation coming through with the in vivo CAR, as was mentioned, but also in the gene therapy AAV space, we're having engineered capsids, novel technologies to enhance the potency, reduce the toxicity. And it's an exciting few years we're going to have ahead with these next generation approaches of taking over and bringing some rebirth to the CGT space.
Excellent.
And I would just add that I've been in this field for 25 years, and we've been calling it a novel, up-and-coming field for 25 years, right? And it's time to transition to, instead of a startup idea, to a product class that is delivering therapies to patients.
It's no longer a novel idea.
Yes.
I think also it's very important for companies or for the entire field to get to the next step of manufacturing because it's still far too expensive.
Yeah.
And we need to cut down on the cost for the actual goods when we come to market.
There has been a lot of discussion about that today at the conference.
Yeah.
Yes.
And there's
cost of goods.
so much of the price tag on each treatment is actually manufacturing.
Right.
Which means we can't go for all diseases. If it would be cheaper to manufacture, we could also look at other indications. More common indications, for example. But without that, it will never be as big as a more easier manufacturing product, I think.
Karen, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I get to go last, but I think you talked about like the maturation of the field. And of course, we want to learn the lessons of what's happened before and the different bottlenecks like manufacturing, driving up the price perhaps. But investors use the word like also commercial failures, really scrutinizing, right? The asset valuation, is it feasible to get through trial and to have the market that you're expecting? And I think we have a lot more data also now to understand what the market is. And we also have to bring that data forward for investors to get them on board because they are discounting everything that you say. But we have learned a lot. And I think when we understand the scale of the need for any particular indication, we can also make the appropriate investment, make the appropriate manufacturing. And I think when we have that information coming forward, that's also going to be really helpful to expand. So there's a lot of promise, I think, and a lot of lessons learned.
So let's turn to the regulatory environment next. Regulatory agencies have shown increasing flexibility in certain submission and approval pathways for advanced therapies. How are developers adjusting their strategies to take advantage of these evolving frameworks while still managing risk? Eric, you want to start with that one?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not a regulatory expert.
Keith is a regulatory guy, but we're going to get to him next.
From my perspective, at least the FDA seems to have become much more unpredictable.
Yeah.
I know there is talk about these pathways and you have this platform and umbrella INDs and whatever, but what I'm hearing and concerning me is, for example, the Regenex issue, Unicure. They've done trials that supposedly followed what was agreed with the FDA, and then the FDA changes its mind and no longer are these approvable data sets like would have been pre-agreed. Like me running a small biotech, we can maybe only afford 1 or 2 clinical programs to get a proof of concept. It's concerning that it's unpredictable how the regulatory authorities are going to treat your proposal and your data. And I mean, we're actively now considering doing initial work in China instead.
You're not alone.
It's cheaper and faster and at the moment seems more predictable.
And more innovative.
Go ahead, Keith. Tell us your regulatory tale.
So I think that what we've seen is the guidance, the messaging, and the mechanisms have allowed for potential acceleration.
Okay.
And the FDA, at least, was really moving that way until the leadership changed last year. And there was major disruption in the progress that had been made over the prior years. And the concern, I think, in the industry is that major disruption happened. There was chaos at the agency, but it's not going to resolve anytime soon, because we just got news this week that the commissioner of the FDA has resigned. We got news last month that the director of the Center for Biologics resigned. And so whole new leadership, potential for all new thinking in terms of how these products are handled. And so the uncertainty remains, as Eric pointed out correctly, right? Yeah. There's a great deal of uncertainty, and that is a problem. That is a problem for the agency. But having said that, the pathways exist, and when the science is excellent and compelling, there's gonna be a path forward. Yeah. And so I think it's not just the regulators, right? You need that data to tell a compelling story to be a market success, because getting past the regulators is just one step to becoming a market success. And so I think it's beholden on all of us to be able to develop data packages that are compelling and meaningful, not just to the regulators, but to all of the stakeholders.
You want to say something?
Yeah, the payers,
right.
For example. So we all have seen what happened if you didn't agree with the payers before you launch a product in hemophilia, for example, where you have an approved product, but nobody wants to buy it or pay for it.
Right. Did you guys have anything you wanted to add to that?
I just think the positive, like Keith was saying, is the fact that we do have the programs, and what we've seen also is that the companies are engaging with the regulators early and really following these processes to discuss the questions of how do we get the approvals early and how do we align on the strategies. Yes, it's uncomfortable right now because there's so much uncertainty, but the great thing is that the companies are following, the developers are following the tools. And I feel that's really important, because if they take their findings in different markets, that's going to help them.
Well, okay, so let's move on. Let's talk about funding. While biotech funding has shown signs of recovery, Many CGT developers continue to face capital constraints. Where are you seeing investment return to the market, and where do funding gaps remain most pronounced? Karen, I'll throw that one to you first.
Yeah, we've definitely been working with some companies who had great rounds. And there is, I think, a lot of anticipation also that we're getting into new therapeutic areas. We can deliver to new organ systems. That opens up a lot of possibilities, which is getting investors excited. But they are still very wary about the intended market size. How many people are going to benefit from this amazing therapy? But they also need to know that there is a lot more data available. So I think those cases are being strengthened by the companies a lot better. I mean, if we think back to the Luxturna launch at that time, they had guided, that's always thought of as a commercial flop. At that time, they guided to 1,000 to 2,000 patients in the US. That was in 2017, 2018. It was a kind of this estimate. And that's true, we didn't have the data. If we would do it today with the kind of data that we have, we would have said there's not more than 800 patients, which makes a big difference. But it should be considered a success because they actually treated probably half of the patient population. That's amazing.
It's amazing.
But when we look at the Roche financial statement and why it's written off, it says doesn't meet sales expectations. So we need to match those expectations for the investors, and we just have more data. So they need to understand we have better projections. This is really, we've learned so many lessons, right, in the last 5-6 years, and that needs to come forward. And I think they're understanding that we can have much stronger information about the patients. And patient groups, I think, are also taking a huge step in this space. We also support a lot of patient-funded research organizations who know even before there's a therapy, they need a natural history study, and they're doing it. So all that information about the patients is really coming forward to work hand in hand with the biotech, and that's really driving a lot of things.
Thank you for that. Anybody else want to say anything? What are other capital constraints?
So our company, Circio, is a preclinical stage platform company, and it's been extremely difficult to fundraise both in particularly the gene therapy space, but also platform companies have gone out of fashion.
Oh.
VCs tend to like asset-centric plays. You just invest in one program. It's kind of binary. It succeeds or not. So it was so difficult to get traction with VCs. We actually force-fit our story to be more of a asset-centric single play, which didn't make sense from the science we had.
Right.
So in the end, we actually made the decision to place the technology into a listed company, even though we're an early preclinical stage biotech. And we had much more success in the public markets because you
Good
can
for you.
talk to retail investors.
strategy.
These are genetic diseases. They're devastating. It's quite easy to explain the rationale. And in the public markets, people tend to like more these platform plays. And that's the way we've been able to move our program forward and stay platform-centric and not having to listen to VCs who tend to be sort of following the latest fashion.
Right. Given today's tighter funding environment, how are organizations rethinking R&D priorities? What types of programs or platforms are most likely to receive continued investment in the current climate?
It's interesting. I was just thinking about this, and what I'm seeing is these big, large biopharmas are where they're just buying up a lot of small companies and diversifying their portfolio. So you're seeing, a company that was dedicated to development of mAbs now going in and buying up in vivo CAR developments or small molecules, which is interesting because that begs the question of is it because of the sales, they think that diversifying this portfolio is going to enable them more sales, or is it because there's some sort of a combinatorial effect that they might go into where they're potentially thinking about combinatorial effects of different therapeutics? So I feel like the large companies are diversifying the portfolio. I'm inclined to think that it's because of potentially combining different therapeutics.
So the platforms that are most likely to receive continued investment are the ones that you're saying are diversifying.
Yes.
Okay. Would you guys agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, for our company, we're a small company, and we have to be very selective about where we're allocating resources, and we're looking for ways to get answers faster and cheaper, right?
Is it everyone?
And that's why there are so much discussion about starting studies in foreign countries. You hear about, treating fewer patients and trying to get a signal faster, skipping all the dose escalation and trying to, just target an effective dose right out of the gate. I mean, there's lots of little things that you can do just to shrink the resources that are needed to get to an answer, right? And I think that's one of the things that has always been true of all biotech, but is especially true when funding is tight.
Yeah. Lena, you agree with that?
Yeah, I agree. And I also think that it's important for, at least for smaller companies, to get results that can be communicated.
Right.
So you can't be silent for too long, even though investors know that we have this big trial ongoing.
Yeah.
They want to have news all the time. So you put on...
Be updated.
Yeah, if you're not communicating, you're dead.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
All right, so let's talk about execution. As therapies move from early research into clinical development, what separates organizations that successfully translate innovation into viable programs from those that struggle to advance?
Well, I think we've seen some challenges like how big does the trial need to be? How quickly can we get to the answer? And when we look at these different indications, there's often a spectrum of disease of patients. And this presents a challenge with the clinical trial design. And there's the push and pull between I need patients as quickly as possible, as fast as possible into the trial. Who are you willing to include versus who are the ideal patients to do the tests in? I think this balance is always a struggle. And the companies that can get this right are really pulling it off.
I would say one of the things that we talk about a lot, and you see we talked earlier about, accelerated development, and you see in some of the FDA guidances talk about you should have a randomized controlled phase 1 study. And your phase 1 study may be sufficient to support licensure, right? And so we talk about planning for catastrophic success. And so, I think sometimes you're so focused on just getting that first question answered that you're not planning for a highly successful therapy. The reality is most of our gene therapies and the amount of money we're going to charge for them need to be catastrophic successes. They need to be catastrophic successes if they're going to be market successes. And so we should plan for that right out of the gate. And if they're not, it might be time to move to the next candidate, right? So I think, because most of the drugs that are on the market that are doing well were catastrophic successes right out of the gate.
I think Lena had a good point before that cost is important and is too often overlooked, particularly in our field of cell and gene therapy. Cost is a major driver and limiter of uptake. So anything you can do to optimize the performance, get the manufacturing cost down, simplify your product, rather than always thinking how can we make it as fancy as possible or treat the most complicated disease. Keep it simple, get the cost down, and you're more likely to hit that catastrophic
success.
And I think also take time to think about the study design. We've seen so many failed studies with good products, actually.
But because the design,
the primary endpoint was not the correct one, and I talk to physicians quite often who talks about this. That this was we could really use this drug for this patient group, but unfortunately the design of the study was really crappy. So.
Is that a scientific term I should know?
I think it's a good word sometimes.
Yeah. Catastrophic success, crappy. All right, so let's talk about manufacturing. Manufacturing, quality control, and product release remain major pressure points in CGT development, as we know. Where do you see the greatest bottlenecks today, and what strategies are proving most effective in overcoming them? Eric, I'd like you to start with that one.
Yeah, I'm really not a manufacturing person.
Pressure points, I know you feel the pressure points. What are the bottlenecks?
So what I hear in the space of AAV where we're active is that at least for the systemically delivered AAVs, you need to give really massively high doses. That makes the CMC complicated because you need to get your titer up so high. You do large batches, you only get a few patient doses out. So we are focusing on developing our technology where it's essentially an AAV enhancing technology that can enable you to dose reduce substantially. So simply by switching to our expression system, you can get your dose down maybe 50-fold. And in my simple mind, that should simplify manufacturing as well.
Yes.
Less virus titers, simpler to make, more doses per batch should be an advantage also from the cost perspective.
Karen, what about you? What are the bottlenecks?
Well, I think one of the challenges is this variety of patients that we want to treat. And sometimes we're talking about an asset that's for several hundred patients or several thousand patients or tens of thousands of patients. And each of those is a completely different scale for manufacturing. And we don't have a really good system to have that flexibility, I think, across the scale of different problems that we're trying to address. So I think there can be a lot more innovation also maybe on the regulatory side for CMC, of course, to have fit for purpose development.
Alina, what are you saying?
I mean, coming from a Thermo Fisher perspective as a life sciences company, what we've heard from our customers is those very early conversations with the providers for the technologies and the materials and the reagents and thinking about the scale up very early and having the proper methodologies in place and knowing that these companies are going to be able to support you in that scale up and the early development has shown to be successful for some of them. So I think having the collaborations with companies that can enable you the ease of manufacturing and scalability might develop that success.
Of course, yeah.
For some, it has worked.
Does anyone else want to say anything on that, manufacturing?
Well, I mean, our company spent a lot of time on it. Some of it is very specific to AAV. We do manufacturing in an SF9 base expression system as opposed to the HEC 293 expression systems. And what that has allowed us to do is get more and cleaner product in the bulk drug substance so that less processing is needed in the downstream to get a pure product. And so I think, you have the two ends of the spectrum. How good is your expression system in your bioreactor, and then how good is your downstream processing such that you get high yields out of that. And I think what we've found is there are a lot of little tweaks that you can implement that help in both areas. But you can also, look at like what Eric was saying, major issues such as getting expression systems that can help you to reduce, tens or 100-fold, along with, expression systems or that allow you improve the production by tens or hundreds-fold. And those things tend to make a much bigger difference than the little changes going into like downstream processing.
All right, we'll move on to the next one, which is about global competition. Global competition is intensifying, as we said earlier, particularly in China and other APAC markets, as they continue to accelerate innovation in this space. How is that changing the competitive landscape, and what should Western developers be paying attention to? All these Europeans, tell us, what should Western developers be paying attention to?
I think it's very difficult because they are somehow playing in another division. They don't usually have the budget constraints that we have. I think I discussed it with a colleague a few days ago, and it's very much like the electric cars, actually.
Oh, that makes sense. a good comparison.
they have so much capacity. They can add people, they can add money. So, I mean, I would say somehow we need to be smarter, but that's
Yeah.
so
Right.
easy.
Easier said than done.
So I don't have a solution to it.
Karen, do you have any thoughts on that?
I think one thing that I've seen other companies also going like to Colombia, for example. Fantastic work there, cheaper cost of doing the trial, but China come up and coming. And I think it depends also what kind of therapy we're talking about.
Sure.
For some things, maybe it makes sense to do one of your trials there. For other things, it might not make sense depending on what you're actually targeting. Do you have a similar, really comparable patient group as you're going to go to in your commercial markets? So I think that's always going to be a consideration where they don't necessarily have an advantage,
Right.
but it will depend on what is really the therapy about.
For rare disease, China is a quite interesting place because you have 1.5 billion people,
Yeah.
highly centralized
Exactly.
healthcare system. So in rare diseases with only a few patients available, they congregate into one or just a very few centers.
Right.
So you can actually do a trial in much fewer sites in a place like China, assuming the disease you're looking at also exists in the same form in that geography. And then the Chinese have been very forward-leaning in enabling investigator-initiated trials and faster regulatory pathways. So right now it seems like a quicker and cheaper way to get to data. And as Western companies, we need to, I mean, they know what they're doing. They're thinking strategically. They have a lot of capital and human resources. You need to go to China and meet these guys and then form partnerships there.
There are partnerships.
Partnerships. Yeah. That's the buzzword.
I think we need to think about it in two different ways, right? I think the one is we need to take advantage of efficiencies that exist in other geographies. And I think the second is we need to help educate lawmakers and people who can make a difference here to help them to understand what can change so that they can we can have a level playing field. I think the thing that people don't understand about China, and the reason China is so attractive and so cheap and easy, is because an investigator, if they want to start a study, does not have to go through an FDA,
Right.
the Chinese equivalent of the FDA. They simply say, make me some drug, tell my IRB that I'm going to treat some patients, and I'll take the risk, and I'll treat the patients, right? And that's it. As long as their hospital IRB agrees with them, they can start treating patients. And there's very little regulation about what is the manufacturing requirements. There's almost no regulation about what the protocol design needs to look like. It's just, I'm an investigator, I have a drug, I want to treat a patient, and you just do it.
Wow.
Right? And then what it allows you to do is cut through all the red tape. You don't have to do any preclinical study if your hospital agrees to that. You don't have to do any development work. You just go straight into the patients, and you can get early answers really fast. Now, once you have the early answer, China really isn't that much different than the United States in the full development. Because once a company takes it over and wants to do a formal multi-site clinical trial, then they do have to go to the Chinese FDA. And the Chinese FDA regulates their products very similarly to how the US FDA does. And the process is quite similar. Now, there may be other advantages, as Eric pointed out, in China to doing some studies, but it's getting that early signal on whether your candidate is going to work, that they're always going to be light years ahead of us because the system is just completely different and designed differently.
And in our field, it's particularly important or valuable because translation from mouse to primate to human is unpredictable.
Yeah.
Something might work in the mouse, not in the primate, and then work in the human. So the faster you can get some validation in a clinical setting is exceptionally valuable.
Alina, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree on all accounts. The fact that the investment into the R&D that comes from the scientific, from the academia, is so strong in China, and I think that's the growing, like you said, I think that's definitely something that differentiates them and enables them to work with the patients, which for us here, I don't know that we're going to be able to make that, unless I do think that there is pathways in terms of sponsorships, like working with having these big companies sponsor investigational studies that are at medical centers.
Yeah.
There is capacities in that stream, but again, we don't necessarily work on that because we're so siloed, and these big companies hold on to their IPs and they're afraid of collaboration like that. So I don't necessarily know how to, advance, but I think the regulatory definitely is one venue.
Yeah.
There definitely are concerns around IP control and
Of course. All right. Well, moving on, and I want you each to take this one because we're going to look ahead. But to close things out, looking ahead over the next 3 to 5 years, what do you believe will determine which organizations emerge as leaders in the next phase of cell and gene therapy development? What do you believe will determine which organizations emerge as leaders in the next phase of cell and gene therapy development?
I think the ones that have the way that I think of it, maybe the flexibility in terms of how they navigate this uncertain field and market. So flexibility in terms of dealing with the uncertainty, whether that is from the perspective of having enough funds to pivot when necessary, or having enough patient data to prove to the investors that where things are going to work. I think also bringing in new technologies. I do think that technologies do make a difference. Like in the case of changing indications, and this is just an example where now CAR Ts are being utilized for autoimmune diseases. So utilizing other indications maybe for the existing therapeutics, and saying this has more value than we initially thought.
Yeah.
I think that's my answer.
Cool. Flexibility. What else, Karen? What do you say?
Well, I think taking on the lessons learned, like the field is maturing. It's not a cowboy space anymore. And I think we've got a lot of experts who have been in the field and know how to push things forward. So it's part of the maturation of the field.
Eric?
In the end, it's great science that matters, and great data. And whoever can be most innovative and develop the best science will prevail. And I think some companies are good at trying new things. I see Eli Lilly, they're investing heavily, this money they're making on GLP-1 into a large set of different technologies. It's not all going to work.
Yeah.
But it's likelier that you end up finding something that proves to be a step change and really can drive innovation. Whereas I think most companies tend to follow fads. Right now, it's a CD19 targeting RNA-based in vivo CAR. Everyone's going to have one of those programs. I saw 3 more companies today doing exactly the same thing. And I think that train has already left the station.
Right.
You need to look for the next thing. But I have the impression that every big pharma now wants to have one of those programs.
Yeah.
And it's going to be like the PD-1 inhibitors. There were 2 clear commercial successes, and 8 or 10 of them approved, and those followers just are not going to be the ones that win out in the end.
Interesting. What do you say, Lena, to that?
Yeah, I think I agree to, of course, great science is always number one, but you also have to choose the right indications.
Sure.
And to do that, you need to search your future market.
Research your future market? Is that what
Yeah, research your future market to see that is this something that the community wants.
Yeah.
It's as important as a nice mechanism of action for a rare disease.
Yeah, like the GLPs in the United States.
Exactly, that would be
Yeah.
something similar to that would be great to have.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say those that can navigate both the regulatory environment and the payer environment, because you gotta have a technical success that leads to a regulatory success that leads to reimbursement success, right? And if you can navigate that path, then you're going to differentiate yourselves. I think there's a lot of companies that only think about one or two, but not all of those steps, and we're seeing them pay the price, while others have been able to successfully navigate all of those steps, and they're working, and that's what we need. This community needs market successes to help the whole community.
Yeah. So market success, great science. What did you say again? Flexibility, lessons learned.
Know your market.
Yes, knowing your future markets, that's all. Those are going to be the organizations that lead, you think? Okay. Well, good. Thank you guys so much. We're going to wrap up the panel. So thank you for this insightful discussion. And thank you, Thermo Fisher Scientific, for sponsoring this panel. And thank you all for listening.